And this time we're on the topic of climate policy advocacy. So, understanding the role of individuals and companies and trade associations and lobbyists and all of the stuff that governments do to either help or hurt climate progress. So, I'm here with James Browning, the executive director of an organization called F minus, and I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself and his organization. Hey, James, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks, Drew. It's great to be here with you. Yeah, long ago, I was just a teacher in Baltimore and started doing some lobbying on good government issues and trying to get smoking bans in restaurants and things like that. And saw something really weird, which was that the other lobbyists I was working with might be trying to ban smoking at a restaurant one day, and then the next day they'd be working for like a car manufacturer trying to defeat stricter emissions controls for cars. And I started looking at lists of lobbyists in Maryland and other states. And when it comes to climate, this same kind of double agency or playing both sides of things is rampant. It's everywhere, and it's a big part of why we are in this mess on climate. Is because, and I know this sounds hard to believe, but some of the lobbyists for the worst fossil fuel companies out there also lobby for sort of small, like boutique climate causes. Like don't worry, yes, it's the world is getting hot, but here's some money for a park in your community, a playground. We're going to protect that endangered species, and these lobbyists get away with having it both ways, and it's a huge problem. So just like a quick example of the power that some of these lobbyists have in Delaware recently, there's an oil refinery in the northern part of the state, which for decades has been releasing like toxic fumes and making people sick who live near the refinery. And they had a bad chemical spill in June. And I went down there to talk to people because the same lobbyist for the refinery also works for the county where it's located. It's called Newcastle County. And so, what this means is that people living around the refinery are seeing their own taxes. First, they go to the county, and then the county hires this lobbying firm. But then that same firm represents the refinery. So, what hope is there for people to have their own government look after them? I went down there to tell this story, and people's initial reaction was, that's horrendous. The county should fire that lobbying firm. But then when I said the name of this lobbyist, people lit up and they said, oh, I love that guy. Like he is so fun. He's so helpful. And he is fun. I'll tell you, I sat next to him at a
Yeah.
hearing, and he has like the most beautiful shoes you've ever seen, like the nicest suit I've ever seen in Delaware. And he looks a lot like, if you ever watched Better Call Saul, he looks like Howard the lawyer character there. And so that's part of why this is so challenging, right? Because people are
Yeah.
like, climate crisis bad. That guy, I love that guy.
Tell us very briefly, what do lobbyists do and how can they use their powers for good, in this case, to help solve climate change, or as it sounds like they're doing in many cases, make it worse? For those who don't even know what a lobbyist is or how this whole machine works, can you briefly describe that?
Yes. So, in any US, state capital, there are hundreds of lobbyists, and most of them have multiple clients, and they could be involved in environment or healthcare or any number of other issues. But probably the most important thing these lobbyists have is that they actually know what's going on in these capitals. And so why is this? A lot of US states, the way the legislature is set up, it's been the same way since the 19th century, and it's set up for like a largely agricultural
Hmm.
society where people aren't available a lot of the time because they have to be tending to their land, and especially at harvest time. And so this is part of why you still have so many states where the legislative session might only be 3 months long. They're barely paid, or in the case of New Mexico, they're not paid at all. And then to make things worse, a lot of states now have term limits, which means by the time you figure out what's actually going on as a legislator, you're shown to the door. And so the ones who are left, like knowing where the bodies are buried, are the lobbyists, and everyone is dependent on them, even like the most staunchly pro climate people, and that's a big part of the challenge.
Really Really interesting. Okay, and so it also turns out, as we learned in our session previously on this topic of climate policy advocacy from Deb McNamara from Climate Voice, it turns out that companies also employ lobbying firms because, unsurprisingly, they also want to influence legislators and often do so in ways far beyond the capacity of any single voter or individual like me or you. So, if we're talking about companies and the way that they engage in the legislative process through lobbying firms and all of that, and of course, this is for the Learn Workplace Climate Action community, what role do you think employees have in helping hold their companies accountable for their choice of lobbying firms to ensure that they aren't hiring and paying for firms that are working both sides of the climate issue, in some cases, completely undermining that company's very sustainability commitments? How do employees get involved in this and help?
Right, that's the key question. You know, the fun thing about exposing some of these lobbyist conflicts is that the records are all public, and anyone, if you go to our website, f-org, you can find examples of, let's say, big tech companies who are saying one thing about what they're trying to do on climate, and you'll find their lobbyist is doing sometimes the exact opposite thing. And so, you know, this is, you know, to take an example, you know, big tech companies are promoting the use of AI for healthcare, for like detecting and treating cancer. Who are the lobbyists helping them to do this? It's lobbyists for fossil fuel companies whose projects are exposing people to carcinogens, whether it's fracking, getting it out of the ground, or whether it's the end use and like the health risks just from being around fossil fuels. And so what F minus has found is that as we start to tell these stories at a place like Johns Hopkins University, which we focused on because they've divested from coal, but their own lobbyists work for a bunch of coal companies. We told that story. We talked to people in the Hopkins community about it, and we forced them to change tack. And that firm has now backed away from representing both Hopkins and coal. So that's a huge institution with lots of ties to fossil fuel interests, but they are also like strongly rooted in healthcare and the public good. And now, you know, a straight out for profit corporation is a trickier thing, but it is equally afraid of bad publicity.
Mm.
And with enough people can organize, I mean, as you showed with your internal organizing at Microsoft, this is doable. And it just starts with telling the story and the
Mhm.
simple act of transparency. Like, wait a minute, like we're trying to reduce emissions, but our own, you know, lobbyist works for Exxon or Chevron.
Mhm. All right, James, thanks so much for your time. Again, this is James Browning from F minus, and we'll see you in the channel.
Thanks a lot, Drew.
Mhm.